rain on the day of my father's funeral was a cliché he would have hated. John Jack Miller was a man of sun-bleached flannels, the scent of sawdust and sturdy, weatherproof honesty. At least that's who I knew for 32 years. The water ran in rivulets down the dark green canopy as I stood with my mother, Claire, her small hand a cold, trembling bird in mine. The scent of damp earth and funeral home lilies was suffocating. We were a small, wounded cluster. My aunt and uncle, a few of Dad's old work buddies from the hardware store, neighbors who remembered him fixing their fences, a life measured in practical kindnesses. The pastor was speaking about integrity, about being a rock, and the words fit the man I grieved so perfectly it was a physical ache. That's when I saw him. At the back of the gathering, under the dripping edge of a massive oak, stood a man in a well-cut gray wool coat. He was tall, like Dad, but leaner. He held no umbrella, just stood motionless, his hands clasped in front of him, his gaze fixed on the bronze casket. He was in his late 20s, maybe. His hair was dark, like mine, but his face... There was a haunting echo in the line of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders squared back against the weather. A ghost of my father in a stranger's frame. I squeezed Mom's hand. "Who's that?" She followed my gaze, squinting through her veil of tears. Her face, already pale, went ashen. The tremor in her hand became a shudder. "I don't know," she whispered. But the words were brittle, cracking with a fear I hadn't heard before. "Just someone from the old business, maybe." She turned her head sharply away, a definitive dismissal. But I couldn't look away. As the pastor concluded, the man didn't approach. He just stood, a silent sentinel. When people began to drift toward their cars for the procession to the grave site, he turned and walked slowly back to the parking lot. I watched him get into a modest, out-of-state sedan and drive away. He never came to the graveside. The stranger became a splinter in my mind, festering beneath the raw grief. At the small reception in our family home, surrounded by casseroles and quiet voices, I pulled my father's best friend Jerry aside. "Did you see that guy at the back? Tall gray coat?" Jerry, his eyes red-rimmed, nodded slowly. "Saw him. Didn't recognize him." Asked around. Nobody knew. "Mom said he might be from the old business," I said, air quoting. Jerry frowned. "Your dad sold hardware for 30 years, Ben. There's no old business." He clapped my shoulder, a heavy paternal weight. "Probably just a guy who respected Jack. Read the notice in the paper. Let it go, son. You've got enough to carry." But I couldn't. That night, after the last mourner left, the house felt cavernous with silence. I found Mom in Dad's study, not crying, but just staring at his empty leather chair. The room was a shrine to his orderly mind. Labeled filing cabinets, a clean desk, fishing trophies on the wall. "Mom, who was he?" She jumped. "Oh, Benjamin, I told you I don't know. You looked like you'd seen a ghost." She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself. It was a funeral. We were all seeing ghosts. Her voice was a threadbare blanket, offering no warmth. "I'm tired, honey." So tired. For a week, I tried to bury the splinter under the avalanching paperwork of death. The will was simple. The house and assets to Mom, with a small trust for me. As I sorted through his desk for insurance policies, I found the usual. Manuals for tools, receipts, tax returns going back decades, and then, in the very bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, tucked behind hanging folders labeled warranties. It was a small, fireproof lockbox. It wasn't hidden, not really. But it felt deliberate, a box placed just out of everyday sight. I knew the combination. Mom's birthday. It had always held their passports, their marriage certificate, my birth certificate. I lifted the lid. On top of the familiar documents was a sealed, letter-sized envelope. No name, no address. Just a date written in my father's precise hand. Oswin 17, 1995. A year before I was born. My heart hammered against my ribs. I broke the brittle seal. Inside was a single faded photograph. A younger version of my father, looking perhaps in his early 30s, stood on a rocky beach I didn't recognize. He was smiling a carefree, unguarded smile I rarely saw. His arm was around the shoulders of a beautiful woman with long, dark, wind-tossed hair. She was laughing, her head tilted toward him. They looked incandescently happy. And tucked against the woman's side, one small hand in hers, was a little boy of about 3 or 4. The boy had my father's dark, serious eyes. The world tilted. I turned the photo over. Again, my father's handwriting. Martha and Daniel. Seabrook. Confronting my mother felt like a kind of violence. I laid the photo on the kitchen table between us, next to her untouched tea. The sound she made was a small, wounded thing. All the fight, the feigned ignorance, drained from her. She aged a decade in a minute. "His name is Daniel, isn't it?" I asked. My voice surprisingly calm. "The man at the funeral?" She nodded, tears finally spilling over. I didn't know for sure. Not until I saw him. He has Jack's eyes, his mother's mouth. The story spilled out in broken fragments. The summer of 1995. A struggling period in their marriage. A consulting job my father took in a coastal town 3 states away. He was gone for 4 months. When he came back, he was different, distant. Then, a few weeks later, he broke down. He told me he'd had an affair, that it was over, that she was moving on. He begged for my forgiveness. We went to counseling. We rebuilt. We had you. He was a wonderful husband and father. I chose to bury it for us, for our family. "And the boy?" I asked. The word half-brother screaming silently in my head. He told me there was no child. He swore. The photo. I never saw that. Her gaze was fixed on the happy trio. He kept his promise to me for 28 years. He never saw them, never contacted them. As far as I know, he provided for them financially through a private arrangement. I knew about the monthly withdrawals, but I never asked. It was the price of our peace. The man in the gray coat had a name, Daniel. He was my father's son, my brother. A living, breathing secret my father had carried to his grave. The honorable, rock-solid man I worshipped had a second life, a second family, folded neatly into a lockbox. Finding Daniel wasn't hard. His mother Martha had a modest online footprint. An artist, it seemed, from a few gallery showings. A search of her name with Seabrook and Daniel led me to a LinkedIn profile for a Daniel Rhodes. Software engineer. He lived a 6-hour drive away. The profile picture, though professional, was unmistakable. It was the man from the funeral. "What do you say to the secret brother?" "Hi, I think our dad died. Want to talk?" I drafted 100 emails in my head. Finally, I settled on something simple. sent via a social media message. Daniel, my name is Ben Miller. I believe you were at my father, Jack Miller's, funeral on the 12th. I would very much like to talk, if you're willing. No expectations, just talk. Ben, he replied in 20 minutes. Ben, I wasn't sure if I should come, or if I should reach out. I'd like to talk. I can drive to you this weekend. He'd read the obituary online, driven 6 hours, stood under that tree. I saw my mother in your mother's face, he said. The pain. I almost left right then. I didn't want to cause more. You have her mouth, I said, echoing my mother's observation. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. So I'm told. That first meeting unlocked a floodgate. We began to talk regularly. Texts, then long phone calls, then weekend visits. It was achingly strange and surprisingly natural. We shared a love of terrible sci-fi movies, a hatred of cilantro, and a sarcastic sense of humor that felt like an inherited trait. We were two pieces of a puzzle, never meant to fit together, but somehow creating a new, more complete picture of the man who fathered us. I brought him to the house to meet my mother. It was one of the hardest things I have ever witnessed. Claire Miller, faced with the living proof of her husband's greatest betrayal, and also, undeniably, a piece of him. She was trembling, but she was gracious. She made tea. She asked about his mother, her voice thick with a complex empathy. She showed him pictures of my father through the years, pictures he'd never seen. Daniel brought the birthday letters. My mother read them, her fingers tracing my father's handwriting, and she wept. Not just for her own loss, but for the loss he'd imposed on this other son, for the impossible tightrope he'd walked. We learned that our father had been supporting Martha and Daniel not from some hidden fortune, but from a second job he'd worked for years. Weekend. Consulting, he told us, was golf with clients. The hardware store hadn't just been his life. It had been the engine funding his 2 separate lives. The weight of that deception, the sheer exhausting logistics of it, cast his frequent quietness, his sometimes distant demeanor, in a devastating new light. Daniel invited me to meet his mother. The drive to Seabrook felt like a pilgrimage to the source of the secret. Martha Rhodes lived in a light-filled cottage a block from the sea. She was older, her dark hair streaked with silver, but her eyes were the same as in the photograph, bright and kind. She hugged me, and I felt her cry softly against my shoulder. He talked about you, you know, she said, pulling back to look at me. In the letters to Daniel. He was so proud. Ben made the honor roll. Ben's learning to cast a fly rod. It was his way of sharing you with us, of keeping a thread between his 2 worlds. We spent the afternoon on the beach where the photo was taken. Martha told me about the man she knew, more impulsive, more romantic, freer than the steady provider I knew. It was like she was describing a character from a novel, and yet the details, the way he always untied his shoes before taking them off, his specific whistle for old rock tunes, were intimately, uniquely my father. Daniel and I walked along the water's edge, the cold Atlantic wind biting our faces. It's a lot, isn't it? He said. Yeah, he was 2 different men. Or maybe, Daniel mused, he was just a complicated man who made a terrible mistake and spent the rest of his life trying to do right by everyone, and in the end stretched himself so thin he couldn't fully be there for anyone. It was the most profound and forgiving thing anyone had said about my father since he died. It's been a year now. The grief for my father has changed. It's less pure, tinged with anger and confusion, but also with a deeper, more tragic understanding. He wasn't the flawless rock. He was a man who cracked and spent his life holding the fissure together with willpower and monthly checks. But from his secret, an unexpected gift has emerged. Daniel is my brother. Not just in DNA, we talk every week. He helped me rebuild the deck my father had been meaning to get to. His methodical, engineer's mind a perfect complement to my more haphazard approach. My mother, after a period of profound adjustment, has begun to send him birthday cards. She says it helps her forgive Jack, to see this part of him be cared for. We don't have a tidy, happy ever after. There's too much pain in the foundation for that. We have something more real. A complicated, chosen family born from a lie. We have a full picture, where before we all had only halves. Last month, Daniel and I went to visit Dad's grave together. We stood there, two sons, one planned, one a secret. Both loved in the flawed, limited way he was capable of. He missed out, I said. The spring grass soft under our feet. On what? Daniel asked. On this, I said, gesturing between us. On us knowing each other. He would have hated the how, but I think he would have liked the U.S. The man in the gray coat is no longer a stranger. He's the keeper of the other half of my father's story. And in learning that story, in embracing the brother I never knew I had, I haven't just buried my father. I've finally begun to truly know him. If this story of secrets, family, an unexpected connection resonated with you, if you've ever wondered about the hidden chapters in your own family's book, then you might want to subscribe. I'm Ben, and this journey of piecing together my father's life taught me that the most profound stories aren't always the ones told out loud. Sometimes they're the ones we have to carefully and compassionately uncover. I share narratives about identity, legacy, and the quiet truths that shape us. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thanks for listening.